Thank you. So yeah, I started a company called New Avenue about 5 years ago, specifically to focus on accessory dwellings. And what I'm going to talk about today are just online tools that people can use to manage anything. Honestly, it works pretty well for anything that's between 50,000 up to $1 million, residential remodel or addition or accessory dwelling. Everything we do is, well, not everything, but vast majority of what we do is an accessory dwelling or an accessory structure of some kind. But that falls into, attached things, detached things, ground floor, upper floor, and then of course like the classic backyard cottage. So I'm going to run through a few things. Basically, a little bit of background, which the Coles made the point that I think last night, and I liked the ring of it, that we've done more accessory dwellings than anyone else. So I don't know that I have to qualify myself too much, but we've worked with 93 homeowners and 93 different projects, which is actually several hundred homeowners when you factor in the number of people. 20 of them are completed homes that people are living in right now. 30 are in design or construction. And really the majority of those, 30 are in design and 5 are in construction. So if you add those up, the first little insight I'll share is that's 55 projects out of 90. The other ones, a bunch of them we got hired by real estate agents just to do an assessment early on. And it's a very, very early thing because someone was going to buy a house and they wanted to know they could put an accessory dwelling unit in. So they got like a couple hours into the research and they said, okay, it's good to know that we can do that. We're going to buy this house. But then that's only a handful. That's 5 or maybe 10. I forget the exact number. But then there's another, about 30% of the projects that we're involved in, it doesn't get past the architecture stage. Something comes up, like we've had people move. We've had sad stories like divorces, and we've had really great stories of someone who founded a tech company that went public and was just like, I'm moving to, down in the Bay Area, it's Piedmont. He's like, I'm moving to this mega mansion, like I don't need this anymore. So stuff happens though over the course of these projects because they take a long time. But big part of what New Avenue does though is we've got an online, a bunch of online tools that people work with all the way through the entire project, from the very beginning of like the idea through the actual moving in. So we have 1,800 projects that people have started where they come in and they use it a little bit like Pinterest or Houzz, where they save pictures and ideas and images, but then we also report to them real costs and real timelines and schedules of completed projects. A little bit like this, the stories that Cole and everyone up here are tracking. Only we get a lot more detail than what you get here because we track every single invoice that goes through our system. So over the course of this chat, I'll show a few pictures just to give you an example of what we've done, and then I'm going to dig into the real process of designing, permitting, and building an accessory dwelling as we've seen it, and then I'll share some examples of project management tools. And there's a bunch of stuff that we'll post on our site that people can download for free that's really useful. If you've never done it, almost all of it will be useful. If you're an architect or a contractor, there will be little pieces that are probably worthwhile and insightful. So quick background, just to give a personal touch. I grew up in this house over here. The screen's not that big, but it was a Sears catalog home that was built in 1908, delivered by rail car to a town in Buffalo, New York. The reason it's interesting and worth sharing is it was sold in 1908 or 1910, no one knows exactly, as a single family house. But then in the 50s, it was sliced in half after World War II, and the upstairs became an apartment and the downstairs became an apartment, and it worked that way until the 70s when my family moved in, and then I actually remember being, 4 or 5 years old, and my dad ripping out the doors that you put in the sort of vestibule that separate the two apartments. So a lot of single family houses morph over time, and that's, I think, what we're in the sort of experiencing now. That's just zoomed in, a closer picture of it. And Buffalo, New York. We get snow, you guys get rain, right? But here is a picture of what New Avenue's done. This is a 700 square foot cottage in Orinda, which is a town east of San Francisco. It was our second project we were ever involved in. It was designed by an architect who's been in Orinda for, he's been working there for over 50 years himself, but his father was an architect as well. So they've been a name in that town for a very long time. Example floor plan. This is pretty nice. It's a huge 12-foot, well, huge relative in our world, 12 by 20-foot bedroom, two-sided glass fireplace that you see through, and actually this is a view across a valley out into the sort of Orinda Valley that you see from the living room, the kitchen, and even the bedroom. So it's a very nice place, like wood floors, the view's sort of out that window. Lots of Spanish tile stuff that in a big kitchen. This is a much smaller one. It was 300 square feet. It was at the end of a driveway in a 3,000 square foot lot. The floor plan is kind of go in the main door. The driveway's over here. It used to be a one-car garage that was about that big, and then we've added a bathroom, closet, little kitchenette, staircase, a lot like Cole's staircase that goes sort of two portions of a 287 degrees to get up to the loft. So that's the staircase and the kitchen and some custom shelving. Again, the kitchen, the bathroom, the closet, the main door on the right, and then the loft up top, which I know there's the design session earlier. One thing I've learned is if you can get the peak to be at least 6 feet or 6'5", it's a game changer. If it's 5'5", it's not habitable. Yeah, I've get nods of agreement. The difference in that little bit is 100% worth it, which one of the houses on the tour, which I loved, I think it's the biggest one on the tour, the 2-story one, they dug down a few feet. It's totally worth it, even if it costs you 10,000 bucks. So it's like literally you're doubling the size of your space. So what the goal for today is, that's all just sort of lead in. I'm going to talk through what we figured out more or less the hard way. My background was actually economic development, anthropology and economics undergrad, no architecture, no construction. I did work construction a little bit, and then I tried unsuccessfully to design or contribute to the design of the first few projects. Because it's fun, it's alluring, it's hard not to, but it's not my job, so I don't get to play the role of, the client gets to play that role, of course, when they're designing with an architect. But what we're really good at is project management, and what we've learned to do is break each project down into 5 phases, which anyone who works in architecture would know the phases. There's basically pre-design or ideation, and then in the next several slides, I'll walk through the types of software and tools that people can find. Some things are very advanced, pencil and paper, But as you walk through this, there's pre-design, ideation, that's just figuring out what you want. And then there's program development, which is where phase 1, where you start getting into the real needs of the person and the users and sort of what the goal is going to be. Phase 2, schematic design, is sort of the fun architectural component where you're dealing with elevations and heights and look and floor plan and all that. The third phase, design development, is when you pick out materials, fixtures, appliances. That's where the line, it's cheaper to do it on paper than, in concrete and wood, or to redo it on paper than in concrete and wood. That's where that line really rings true. That second project I showed, the small house, perfect example. The homeowner changed her mind and went from I think it was a 24-inch sink to a 30-inch sink in her bathroom. After all the tile was in, the toilet was in, the walls were painted, the little sconces were above the mirror. It was an easy $5,000. Like they were jackhammering out the toilet, moving it over, ripping open the walls, electrician, drywall, paint, the whole deal. But she loved her big sink, so she got that. Would have been cheaper on paper. The fourth phase, construction documents. That's the blueprints. I saw Cole's plans today, actually. They're typically 5, 10 pages. Well, I should say typically 10 pages. I've seen one set that was in the 5 range. But 2 foot by 3 foot printout and just page after page of detail that most homeowners can't read. Last phase, phase 5, construction. So what New Avenue does is we help guide people through and we track how much each of these phases really cost. And actually, I should get into that a bit so you guys understand where we get our info. As a company, what we do is we've got a project timeline where people collaborate. So there's an architect or a homeowner, say a husband and wife, and then an architect and a contractor who all join the same page. And then the homeowner, very, very early on at the ideation phase, they could literally paste in a link to their Pinterest page or paste in a link to their house or save from a bunch of pictures of projects we've checked out or projects we've worked on. But either way, it's just getting the ideas going. So that's where collaboration occurs. But what we also have are several, it's not shown in the screenshot, but several sort of features that have some teeth to them or some real structure and data behind them, which is bill paying, where we accept proposals from architects and accept bids from contractors that go into it, and I'll show you an example. But the numbers get submitted by the architect or the contractor, reviewed and approved by the client, and then we manage the payments, so we actually track what it really costs. And I actually got a kick out of I get it. It's unfortunate the degree of like confusion around projects, but Susan's, I'm looking at the little brochure that we're giving out for this thing. My wife and I rented Susan's, I think it's number 11 on the tour. And last night she told us that she spent $110,000, but she did all the finished carpentry, and she painted the interior, and she painted the exterior, and she did the landscaping. And the finished carpentry, I should say, was a cedar ceiling and cedar stained grade window trim all around the windows and doors. Expensive stuff, like easily $20,000 worth of work. So she actually said she spent 110, and then she did, say, 20,000 worth of work. So she's really, it's a $130,000 project if you walk in there. Whereas when you see, like, you know, someone quoted 90 on this example, so, you know, it's often that homeowners will roll in and say, we saw that that was 90, but we're willing to put some sweat equity in. We'll do it for probably 70, right? It's like, no, she really was more like 130. So what we do though is by tracking all the invoices, we have that info. So we have a database of all the info for what it really took. Most of our projects take 18 months. Some are about a year, some are 2. Most of that time goes into design and permitting. Construction really should be 6 months. I think, I don't know, you could verify. I mean, anyone who's built these, they're custom projects, so 6 months is it's a good timeline. I've seen it go faster very, very rarely. I've seen it go longer, which is unfortunate. But the norm is really 6 months. But we know the costs and we know the time, so that's what we do. That's where we get our information that we basically communicate back to people. So a few tools that people can use. If I was to run through a typical project, I would say Pinterest is the easiest. And I went through one of the houses here. They had all their little pictures out that were out in front of the house. That's the one that's under construction. I'm like, it's the same thing. It's just you can do it online. It's like, what do you like? What do you want? Pictures of stuff in the neighborhood. So you can start with Pinterest, you know, or you could use House. I think I've got that in here. So here are my design books on House. You can do that. You can do pictures of the neighborhood. So people do that, and they collect their ideas, and you just throw it up, and it's like no holds barred. Anything you like, you just collect it, and it's like a notebook. So that's something that should always be done. After that, yeah, another example. I mean, real pictures, magazines into a notebook. Someone I know in San Francisco did a phenomenal remodel, and this was a book that they had. Most organized client I've ever seen. It was 50 pages, start to finish, 10 years worth of work, even good penmanship on, you know, it was good. So, but all that stuff is essential. And then program development was where the unlimited sort of have fun stuff starts to get real. And this is another thing I love. This was a early client of ours. It's an image that was uploaded to our site, and you know, we're administrators on all the projects that are on our site, so we see this stuff flow through. She had gone, it doesn't show too well on the screen, but she had gone into explicit detail about her kitchen. The bar, you know, big counter space, she needs that, you know, the stove, all of this was perfectly done to scale. This was the size that would fit in her property. She did that right. Table fits here, perfect as well. Coffee table, wraparound couch, the whole thing, she nailed it. And then over here, it says stairs to the upstairs, bathroom, laundry, and and desk. So that's her office, which is maybe 120 square feet. So this is, again, a good exercise for a homeowner. And this is why you need architects too. This is her program. Like, her kitchen is what matters to her. And this other stuff does not matter to her. So that's an example of beginning program development. So another way, this was mentioned earlier if anyone was here, these books have been mentioned a bunch of times. What's great about the Not So Big House and In-Laws, Outlaws, and Granny Flats, In-Laws, Outlaws, and Granny Flats has lots of pictures of great accessory dwellings. So that's just good for inspiration. And it's got a few recommended sort of exercises. What I love about the Not So Big House is there's checklists and exercises to go through, like what you want to do at different stages in your life and what you want to do in different rooms at different times. And that's all what drives, you know, informs the designer or the architect for what you want. Or what you should get, actually. You might not know what you want. Again, what New Avenue does is we've taken a lot of these checklists and we put them online. So people come in and they start a project, those 1,800 people that have started projects, and they just start recording stuff like where I live, who it's for, you know, how many people live here, are there kids on the way, and this goes on for 10 times what you see here. You know, are there any bad knees in the family, stuff like that. These are all things that I view it as almost a reminder, not necessarily something that has to be completed perfectly, but we've seen 2 projects go all the way through building permits where someone didn't ask if there was like a health issue, and it turns out they're really bad knees. And 2 projects we've seen, I should say, went all the way through building permits as 2-story structures with a staircase Turns out it's for a father-in-law who has a really bad knee who can't get upstairs. So that was $20,000 down the drain because someone didn't think through, what this is. So in defense of an architect, it's impossible to have, well, it's not impossible, but few homeowners are willing to pay you hourly to sit there and like go through every possible scenario that might be an issue. So it's always like try to do as good as you can in the amount of time that the budget will afford. With a website, it's beautiful because we can throw up 1,000 questions and say, spend all the time in the world on there. I think last week we had 120 hours of our active clients going through this kind of stuff that they didn't have to pay for, that someone can just skim through it and in 30 seconds of like billable time or 5 minutes of billable time, they can catch a few things that might steer our projects towards not being two-story, ADA accessible two-story buildings, because that kind of what happened in 2 of those scenarios. So once you get through pre-design and program development, schematic design, I mean, this is the fun part. The programs are programs that I would say homeowners should not bother learning. You could learn, say, SketchUp, but AutoCAD, Revit, ArchiCAD, pencil and paper on occasion. But this is where you really get into the details. This is truly when the architect gets involved. From what New Avenue's perspective is, the architect gets involved right here, where the homeowners have gone through and done a bunch of stuff. And then we actually introduce architects that we work with. I mean, we're more or less an online virtual partnership of architects and contractors with a bunch of structure layered on top. So once somebody hires an architect here, then you start getting into the real design. And schematic design, for us, we typically see at least 3 different versions. Scheme A, Scheme B, Scheme C, we call it. It's an iterative, creative process. It also is usually a solid 3 months between here and here of just people getting to the point where they want to do something to actually getting their schematic design completed. Design development, the 3rd phase, and this is, we've got 7 different worksheets or checklists that we've developed, which again, I'll share this with everyone. This is just a screenshot. We've got them in, we keep it simple, PDF and Excel. That's what people use. I mean, those are realistically, if you want to talk about technology and design, almost every worksheet or spec list or finish list I've seen has been done in Excel. So we stick with that because it works. But again, what we've got on our 7 different versions is the stuff that we've seen purchased on the 20 projects that we've completed or spec'd on the other hand bunches. People won't necessarily do everything, but it's a reminder. Like, think about these things. Don't forget it. Try to get that sync right so that you're not doing a big change order to move it around. So that's what really design development is. It's appliances, materials, fixtures, things that can really, in say Susan's example, it's a lot of the stuff that she did on her own at the end, but it's stuff that can really drive the price through the roof. It's the difference between a cheap rental with vinyl windows and fiberglass shower and stained concrete floors that you do yourself for $300, or roll shower head that cost you $800 and tile that cost you $6,000 and hardwood floors that cost you $15 a square foot or whatever. So that's where this stuff kind of all comes into play. The 4th phase, construction documents. Whole point of this slide is just to show anyone who's never seen a set, although you'll see them if you're touring around today. Little details like this, done by an engineer, will have all sorts of, what is this, 1, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 16 comments on where the wall meets the roof, and the insulation and the layers of stuff that go underneath the shingles and all that other thing. So this type of detail, I think from a software perspective, it's ArchiCAD, Revit, AutoCAD, stuff that frankly I've never even opened, because we do the software that helps people keep their stuff organized and collaborate with each other. But those are, it's a serious skill set to learn how to use all these things. But a typical set of construction documents that we see is, just for an example, has 10 different pages. Again, just to show, and there's that one little detail on this one structural page. Where we're based in Berkeley, it's not that different from what I can tell, especially from Susan's, whose cottage that I stayed in, which is in a historical district. You've got a couple pages of just like what's going on with zoning codes, waste diversion plans, all that stuff. So there's a couple pages, well, another way of saying it, each one of these has, this is 7 pages and this is 8 pages of more or less a written essay. So it's a Word document. Oftentimes it just gets paste it into the PDF that looks like that. You know, and then you get in, this is the waste diversion plan, then you get into the real, what I would consider architecture if I'd never been involved here, the fun stuff, the size and the shape and the look, and then you get into all these little details that if I was a homeowner, I wouldn't want to know, like how thick is the rebar or whatever. So that's construction documents. And then during construction, and I should say, you know, my goal is really just to share what I know and then have these documents all available for people to download. So I don't want to keep going back to sort of New Avenue's role, but all this stuff, our role in here is just to say, collect a quote from a proposal from an architect for how much money they expect it to take, or how much time they expect it to take to get through these things. And then the whole point of New Avenue is they just host like these PDFs or whatever, just get saved on the site, and then it's all the discussion is there, and then later on when the contractor gets involved, or 9 months later, 12 months later, when you're actually getting somewhere as the homeowner and it's kind of time to bid it out and build it, you can go back and refresh what you obviously forgot. Because usually this stuff gets buried in email. But once all that stuff is collected and sort of saved, we do get very involved in the bidding and construction phase. So what we have narrowed ourselves down to via the projects that we've completed is about 175 row budget. And this is just one section. This is the framing section. It's based on the CSI codes, which is an industry standard for construction, but I think there's actually 45,000 CSI codes, so it's not something you want to just look up and use as a homeowner. But we took the top 175 that are relevant for our size project. Within the framing, it's rough carpentry, hardware and framing material, pickups, deliveries. At least as this contract, when we send this out, it's blank. The plans are completed, and then the contractor fills in what the budget would be for each line item, and they can choose how many they want to use. So out of 175, oftentimes it's only 30 or maybe 50 that actually get a number. But the key is, when you're the homeowner and you don't see a number right there next to specialty or finished stairs and railings, you're not getting, I'll use Cole's as an example, you're not getting the staircase that he has in his house with the, I don't know, reclaimed iron and the circular staircase and all that. But if you do have a number there for X thousands of dollars for something like that, then you know you're getting it. But what we do is we send it out blank, contractor will fill it in and say, this is my bid basically, and then across the 175 rows, you know, he or she will use 30 or 50. We did it in Excel quite a bit. We now do it on our project page, and the key component to administering it successfully is really the connection. I mean, this is an example, the same section, rough carpentry, as it would show on our project page. So this is a real project that's almost done in a town east of San Francisco where the client's name's Clayton. But the key I should say is that this budget is tied to a construction agreement, and then we only pay, at least when we're involved, the way we manage projects is we do a bid, and then it's a fixed price bid, and you only change the numbers via a change order, which is a good thing and a bad thing sometimes. You never know. But oftentimes we get positive change orders and negative change orders. We probably get about 20 on an average project for one of our projects. And usually it gets done, well, we're averaging within 3% of the bid price is what the project gets completed for. So the key though is good contract, good drawings, and then a good budget, and then actually the ability to sort of administer it properly. I just ran into a guy on the tour today who said he started a project, or his brother, sorry, started a project at a price of, I think he said $350, and it was a fixed price project, and then the budget kind of got thrown out the door, and then it turned into time and materials, and his brother ended up spending over $1 million. So that's a convenient story to come across today, but it's an anomaly. But there's some range that people just, if you don't manage it well, it's just well, I should say, I think it says somewhere on the top of one of these, I'm like, if you can't count it and you can't measure it and you don't have something you're working against, it's gonna go awry. So what we do though is we tie all these three things together, the contract, the plans, and the budget. It all goes under one contract. And then as work gets done, you know, for example, in this project, the rough carpentry bid by the general contractor was $7,800. It was done a long time ago, so it's at 100%. But if this was something in process, we might actually get something where like the hardware and framing material, which had a $6,900 budget, might be at 100% because it's on site. And then the framing, rough carpentry might be at, who knows, 25, 50% because the walls are up and the roof's not, or the wall and the roof is framed, but the plywood and interior stuff hasn't been done. So most of our projects, during the 6 months construction, there's an invoice once a month. We go through, mark all the percentage numbers up to whatever they are, and then collect the money from the contractor and then pay the, or collect the money from the client and then pay the contractor. So altogether, this is more or less how we've learned to manage a project, and that's the gist of what we've learned for online project management. So with that, if anyone's got any questions or thoughts, I know I'm the step between the end and happy hour. Yeah. Yeah.
When you say contractors bid, like, do you have contractors that you're collaborating with, or who are going to bid on this?
So we've found that it's kind of funny. The theory was if everyone gets online and collaborates fairly well, and you're not paying for someone to just kind of manage that, which tenant rep or owner rep is usually an hourly type of job. Or like if you would just inform people and let them do the collaboration online, then it'll make things more efficient. So what we do, and then the other thought was if we get contractors comfortable using that system, then they'll give fixed bids. And, and the idea is they'll come back fairly often and we'll work with people that aren't technically part of our company, but we call them partners. So we do have contractors and architects that are partners. And we use them repeatedly, but it's open to anyone. So a homeowner can go out and get bids. And the reason I say that it was a theory that we might actually come in better with like us doing this stuff and architects and contractors working with us repeatedly. A couple years ago it was an idea, and then what's happened is we've seen lots of contractors that we don't know submit bids, and we've historically or consistently come in below. Most recent one we were 20% below the bid of the other person we don't know. So the person we did know was 20% below, and we've worked with the guy actually who was doing this one was 20% below the person contractor we'd never heard of. So it's open. I mean, a homeowner can hire any architect, they could do any work, they could build it themselves, they could hire any contractor. But we do think that working with the same people repeatedly will sort of help everybody out.
And how do you all get paid? And I also know it's not required that there's something about financing.
So the way we get paid is we charge a percentage of the architect's fees and then a percentage of the contractor's fees. It averages out, well, for the architect it's 20% and the contractor it averages about 8%. We don't do percentage-based fees, it's flat, but for the sake of communicating, I just say what it averages out to.
And is that something that the homeowner, like, is paying, or is that
it's
architects and the builder also paying for that?
So well, it's all lumped into the invoice. So like when you see this bid for $7,800 and down at the bottom there's an overhead and profit of 15%, of that 15%, like 7 or 8 will go to us, and that's sort of the deal. And then, what was your other half of the question? Oh, financing. We set up a financing program that I was pretty proud to have all figured out several years ago. And bottom line is, financing that we can get is like 8%. So I've never even, people ask, and I always say don't even consider it because you might hate big banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America, but they're 4%. So deal with the 50 pages of paperwork and get your 4% home equity loan and just do it. So, yeah.
But is this something that can help people afford them? Like, when do you have a relationship with them?
Yeah, definitely. Well, part of the reason I'm here is just to meet architects and contractors. Thank you, yeah. But we've worked in several different states, North Carolina, Wyoming, a lot of Northern California just because we started there and the word's out. But yeah, it works pretty much anywhere. Yep.
Have you ever worked with folks who have a rehab loan? Like a 200K loan?
We've done a few like that, which is somewhat, it's still useful for us to be involved, but it's like literally when you get a 2 or 3K loan, the banks usually require this type exact process. So, I mean, it's gonna be like, the banks are going to refer somebody who technically does the absolute bare minimum. So they're not going to have their own architect, they're not going to have their own contractor, they're not going to have, the company that administers the funds for the loan won't work with architects and contractors consistently. So it's kind of like you're on your own, and the bank only gives you your money when their inspector says work was done. So, but technically we do legally is the same type of process as those 2 or 3K disbursement companies. Yeah.
You said you have been able to collect data about where the money gets spent in each
Mm-hmm.
phase of the process. Is that those, can you give a breakdown of percentages of where that money comes out? Or?
Sure, yeah, definitely. So the norm, well, it's tough to say, but like I could say Susan's, if it was really if the real number was 110 that she told me, I mean, I wasn't involved in her project, and then, you know, she really did another 25 worth of work, if it was like a $135,000 project, she would have spent probably about, ignoring the permit fees to the city, well, I could tell you I know cold what people do in, say, the Bay Area, and I think it's somewhat similar here, but it's probably $2,000 or $3,000 for program development and like early work, which blurs. It's not. I like to present it as super crystal clear. You go step by step. It's never that way. There's always a little bit. You know, a little bit of time goes here, a little bit of time goes there. But it's usually about $2,000 to $3,000 a month that people pay for, say, on average 8 months between architecture, engineering, surveys, and permits. And then you're kind of $20,000 in before you start construction. And then you divide the cost of construction by 6 months, with a little bit heavier on the beginning because foundations and framing is more expensive. But if it was Susan's at $130,000 construction cost, she would probably spend $30,000 the first 2 months. And then in the next 4 months, 15 to 20 per month. And we actually have, there's some flyer, some 8.5 by 11s. It's one of the guys I work with, he's like, we've got the most clinical marketing material in the history of the world. I've got a schedule that shows like when people have paid stuff and a line, a longer version of this. Actually, all the construction stuff was condensed, and then all the stuff before is spelled out in this 8.5 by 11 that's somewhere in the back. So you could grab that and take a look. Yeah.
So do you have the tools available for free online, or do you
So yeah, that's this stuff. Actually, Cole, I didn't ask. I didn't put in a sign-in sheet, but well, you could definitely just go on the site and find this stuff and sign up, or you know, if there was we could collect emails and I'll just email it out. But go to the site if you want. You just sign up and you start a project, and then you should see most of this stuff. Or I don't know, I'll pass this around. Give me an email and I'll make sure you get an invite to see it all. Cool. Yep.
At what point do you recommend bringing the architect and the builder together?
We bring the contractors in at schematic design, usually. And it's a little bit, we actually have an advisor who's one of the founders of LEED for homes. And she's adamant that you pick the contractor immediately, like as early as possible. And you hire them and you say, all right, we're gonna work together. I actually disagree with that a bit. I think that there's, when you're building a house, it's like literally you're fighting human nature and like hard physical labor. So if somebody doesn't have to bid competitively and they're working for 6 months, so you're just gonna it's gonna be real easy just to let numbers creep up. So what we actually do is we pay a contractor for a couple hours to come in, and one of our regular contractors, and we say, hey, you're gonna get paid just like the architect's getting paid to advise on like this stuff. And it's usually like a trivial amount of time, like 2 hours or less. But they'll do that 2 or 3 times.
Can you do that for every project?
We try to, yeah.
And what does that process allow? What happens?
It allows like simple things like that detail that I showed. The contractor will catch a couple of things. Like you're building on the property line, and that detail where the roof meets the wall, you're not gonna be able to get a vent in because there's a fire code. So you're gonna have to switch to this type of insulation, you're gonna have to do these type of vents. So simple stuff like that. Or the foundation will go down 4 feet with like multiple layers of insulation, and the contractor will say, well, I just poured something exactly like that 2 blocks away that was down 18 inches. Why are you going 4 feet? And, you know, maybe that saves $1,000 or $2,000 or something.
But stuff that basically will prevent the architect from having to
Redraw or a change order during construction. You know, where like framer's putting the walls up and he's like drilling the holes and for the venting in the roof or something like that. And the inspector comes by and says, you can't have holes there, you know. So, yeah, that's honestly where we like earn our keep more or less. It's minimizing those hassles. And it's the kind of thing where if you take out a few, you know, if you catch the upstairs for the guy with the bad knee, or you catch the sink that's just like a random sink and the homeowner really has a very particular concept for the bathroom, or you catch the holes for the insulation, whatever it is. There's so many opportunities to go awry that if you just catch a couple of them, it makes life a lot better. Cool. Happy hour time, right? Thanks for coming.